So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is right now.
Welcome to Found Out, our social justice podcast brought to you by The Meritocracy. We cover all the key issues in social justice and ultimately why you should care about them. Today is an episode that I am super excited about. I've been wanting to do this episode since we launched Found Out, and we are going to be talking about pornography. Specifically, the paradigm shift in legislation and regulation being championed by our very special guest, Baroness Bertin, who is the lead reviewer of the Independent Pornography Review and also a life peer in the House of Lords, where she focuses on pornography, domestic abuse and prison reform, amongst other issues. So hello, Gabby. Welcome to Found Out.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be here.
So before we get into it, we've got a content warning for today's episode. We are going to be covering themes that reference rape, abuse, child sexual abuse material potentially. So we want to give you that warning before we get into the material today. Today specifically is a massive moment to be talking about pornography regulation and the legislative landscape, because just last week, Gabby and a very dedicated team of campaigners and legislators across both the House of Lords, the House of Commons and civil society achieved long-awaited changes in legislation that will be introduced through the Crime and Policing Bill that cover everything from banning depictions of incest and step-incest in pornography to banning nudification apps. So an absolutely massive win for Gabby and the team, and we are really excited to have you on today, able to cover some of that, which is really wonderful. Before we get into that, I think Lewis is going to cover a little bit about the landscape.
Yes, hello, Lewis here. As you know, we like to start the episodes with a few facts to sort of set the scene of what we're talking about. So I have some pornography facts for you. So the pornography industry is estimated to be worth over $90 billion. In the UK, the top 4 pornography sites saw 134 million views in January 2026 alone. A quarter of the nation regularly access pornography, and a third of men watch pornography at least once a week. This one blew my mind, actually. During COVID, Ofcom reported that Pornhub, so a singular pornography website, had a bigger viewership than the entirety of the BBC. So I think all of that just shows how sort of deeply ingrained this is in society and the numbers that are involved.
So, Gabby, first of all, I'd love to learn a bit more about you. How did you come to take on the Independent Pornography Review, and why did it matter to you?
Yes, so my background was that I worked in Number 10 for many years with David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, but also prior to that when he was the leader of the opposition. And I was very much in the sort of trenches, day in, day out, dealing with journalists, dealing with press, dealing with the sort of the day-to-day of politics. And it was a real honour, that job. And it taught me a huge amount about how do you successfully win a campaign, how do you not successfully win a campaign, you know, a whole range of sort of challenges that politics can bring. But at the end of that sort of 10 years of seriously sort of full-on frontline political career, I had the huge privilege of being put into the House of Lords by David Cameron. He was always saying to a lot of us in his office, he had quite a few youngish women, you know, working in the team. And he'd say, you should get yourselves elected. You should become, you know, you shouldn't be back office. You should be front office. And I can remember thinking, no, I don't want that. That's not for me for lots of reasons. Which I now argue against to young women who I'm always trying to persuade to get into politics. But anyway, he had his way in the end, and he said, look, I'm going to put you into the Lords because politics needs more diversity, more women, but certainly the House of Lords needs younger people. So I arrived in the House of Lords in 2016, sort of having never really made a speech or spoken for myself publicly. I'd always been the spokeswoman for him.
Yeah.
And I can remember, though, thinking to myself, well, this is such a big platform. This is such a big opportunity. What do I actually want to do with it? And violence against women and girls and some of the issues that had always kind of worried me and interested me, but I'd sort of forgotten about for a period of time because you were just in the kind of the rat race of the day-to-day cut and thrust of politics. And I thought, right, I'm going to really focus on those issues. I had wanted to join the police when I left university, but didn't have the bravery to do it, didn't feel it would have been right for me with my personality. And so I thought, right, well, I'm going to sort of try and pick up those issues again, which I had sort of, not run with during my career. And so as a result, I got very involved in the Domestic Abuse Act. It was the bill at the time. But I can remember thinking to myself, you can't just make endless speeches about trying to, bring in lots of different tools for the police or help victims when you're not really addressing the cause of why so much violence is still happening against women and girls. And the opportunity came up to lead this review, and I was asked by Rishi Sunak to do it. And I thought, I did hesitate for about 5 minutes. I thought, am I going to be the new Mary Whitehouse? Is this a sort of an issue that is going to actually be people are not ready for it because people, perhaps they would think to themselves, well, politicians shouldn't judge what I'm watching. But I felt very strongly that it was so violent, the pornography, that it had become so extreme that if you didn't tackle it, then actually, a huge well of production of violence against women was not going to be sort of stopped. So I accepted the job. Wow. Very long answer, I'm sorry.
That was perfect. And I mean, that is so fascinating because at the Meritocracy, we really focus on championing prevention and kind of getting right to the source of a problem. And I wonder if you could talk us through a bit about the pornography kind of landscape in the UK. Like, how has that changed over recent years, so perhaps the last decade?
Well, I think the interesting thing for me was when I took on this role. So this was about 2.5 years ago, I suppose, because we took a year to do, then to publish, and then a year to actually sort of get somewhere with it. So it was actually a different landscape in terms of what people were talking about and the taboo. So nobody was talking about violent pornography or pornography in government and in any, in legislation particularly. The Online Safety Act, and to the credit of my colleagues in the Lords, during the passage of that bill, the standards in pornography and how extreme it had become was raised. But the whole sort of reason why the independent pornography review came about was because the government, Rishi Sunak's government, said, look, we can't tackle this in this bill. It would just take too long to sort of deal with pornography standards and the sort of problems with the law as it stands. So we're going to do it in a review. But up until that point, really, it was one of those things that people just wanted to put their fingers in their ears and say, let's look the other way because A, it's too difficult to deal with, and B, it's too embarrassing to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I remember going into government departments, doing the sort of initial fact finding for who does what, how can we sort this out? Just talking to, in theory, the people who were leading the policy areas in government. And it was like, that was the first conversation they'd had on this issue.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Because with the one exception of criminalising rape law, in truth, the timing wasn't right for some. We'd generally been liberalising pornography laws rather than firming them up.
Yeah.
And so there was just a real worry in government about, is this going to be a freedom of speech issue? Are people going to really say politicians don't police our sex lives? And it wasn't like, it actually turned out not to be that case. It was a real moment of, we do need this.
Yeah. Well, I think there's definitely when I've opened up the conversation with people, actually, I think there's a bit of a relief that somebody is having that conversation. And I think the work that you've championed through the Independent Pornography Review is bringing it all out from the shadows, and that takes away shame, and then that starts to reduce harm.
Well, I think one of the things I am proudest of really is that exactly that, just saying, look, I'm not embarrassed about talking about it. I'm not young, I'm not particularly old. I'm sort of, I've got I've got children. I'm sort of, I hope that I could be someone that could talk about it without embarrassment, and also allow, men to talk about it as well, because I think there is that sort of worry that either that men don't want to talk about it because they've either exposed that they've seen it, or they think actually this is all a bit sort of weird for me to be having this conversation. So in fact, we've had some incredible interventions in Parliament, in the Lords and also Ore Aduba came out and spoke about his issues around addiction. I think actually there's been a real sort of opening up of the conversation. So I hope that the review did allow that as a sort of platform to talk about it.
And do you think that kind of embarrassment and shame point that we're talking about there is actually a massive sort of proponent of why we've got to this point, as in it was allowed to sort of exist in the shadows for so long?
Of course. And happy days for the porn industry, because there it was just getting more and more extreme because of the nature of the business model. I mean, things like strangulation in porn, and the fact that so many young women, in particular young women, the cohort between 16 and 34, huge figures, sort of 3/4 of women have experienced strangulation during sex. That is not something that's just sort of emerged overnight. That is something that has certainly been driven by the industry, and they've shaped our sexual taste rather than being shaped by sexual taste, which is a really big, point to make. And that's why there has to be those guardrails put back in place that are proportionate. They're not trying to ban porn. They're not saying, not remote. I've tried to be really not judgy about this because I'm just not. The scale of how many people are watching porn is just a fact to see. And again, I don't judge that. I'm very socially liberal, but you can't, this is not a niche issue. If it was a sort of couple of thousand people doing something a bit odd, well, that's one thing. But this is like a third of the nation watching this content without the proper guardrails in place. So it's long overdue.
And with very real world consequences, as you've just said, you've used the example of strangulation there, which I think, is a really important one to highlight, because we've seen that change people's sexual behaviour, strangulation then becoming, women typically being approached to be strangled during sex by their partners as part of learning from porn, with very, very real world consequences, brain damage, that has been shaped by pornography industry.
And so some of the evidence that was put into the review really stayed with me. I mean, a couple of examples was particularly around young boys not understanding what the right difference between right and wrong. And I felt so upset for them in particular as well, because although went into this work, with women and girls, I suppose, and reducing violence against them at the front of my mind, really, boys are just as much of a victim of this, because age verification has kicked in, so one hopes it's going to get better. But the reality is that young boys from 15 onwards, if they want to see porn, will still be able to sort of see porn. And they were that school teachers, talking about so much violence in the playground, a big increase in child-on-child attacks. So one headmistress said that she'd had a young boy in her office. He had raped one of his school friends, and he was crying because he didn't really understand what he'd done wrong. And I'm not forgiving that, but I'm like, this is the sort of mad situation we've got ourselves into.
Was that, how have we got here?
Really? and I think the other piece of evidence that really shocked me was a sexual health nurse said that she'd been a sexual health nurse for many years, and now increasingly she's seeing young women come into clinics with terrible sort of tears, particularly, I'm afraid to say, anal tears, sexual injuries that are extreme and are not sort of normal sexual activity that you would expect in a sort of young woman of sort of 18. This is the landscape has changed, and that I found that very shocking, I have to say.
No, absolutely. And I wonder if you could, just for listeners who won't be familiar with it, just talk a little bit through how the algorithm and the kind of pornography business model actually works in sort of driving people towards much more extreme content.
Yeah, a lot of pornography is free to view. So you don't have to pay anything, obviously, to see it. And the way they will make their money is through keeping people on those sites for as long as possible to either get advertising or to sort of try and hive them off onto some of their paid for sites.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, they want you to sort of linger on those sites for as long as possible. It's the eyeball economy, it's the click economy. And so in a sort of, I guess, kind of sexual world, if you see something again and again, you become desensitized to it. So it is, there is a business model of trying to, in a sense, making the content even more extreme.
Yeah.
And that's how we've sort of got to this place. The other thing I would say in a lot of this content is that, and that worries me deeply, and this is something that I hope regulation will deal with. This wasn't part of the sort of criminal push that I'm sure we'll talk about, but underneath most pieces of content on porn sites, there are the sort of number of likes and the number of views that piece of content has had. So you can have content that is really a fig leaf for child sexual abuse depictions, titles like, little girl being what by her father, that kind of content. And that's had like 5 million views or 5 million likes. And that just normalises sexual practice that we hope after passing this law actually won't be legal in porn depictions of, but it there's a whole kind of framework around pulling people in and encouraging people, I guess, to sort of enjoy that sort of content that is all about making money. And I think in high harm industry, tobacco, gambling, all of those sort of this areas of which obviously pornography, certain elements of pornography would fit into that, you've got to have much stricter rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's recognizing that attention is the product. So we have to put guardrails around how people's attention is used and where it's directed, because that attention is so valuable to those, platforming that content.
Yes.
But and that real one.
Exactly.
Well,
And then you've got this strange situation where the law that governed offline porn has obviously changed. It just hasn't caught up with the reality of how people are now watching porn online.
Yeah. Because
that was regulation that talked about DVD distribution via the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification. And so it's quite it has been quite complicated to sort of work out how you actually sort of fill in those gaps, which is why it has been, this in a sense sort of free for all. In terms of what is now more extreme pornography, but is still, and up until recently, was totally legal.
You've had some massive legislative wins last week. I just wondered if you would like to touch upon some of the sort of big hitting wins that you and the amazing team you've got that you achieved.
First of all, I think the whole the campaign. I mean, actually, I do want to use this podcast to thank my team because we are very small but perfectly formed. So one of my team, Rachel, is sitting here in the studio.
Yes,
checking I don't say something
silly.
Big up, Rachel.
And she's been brilliant. Gemma Kelly as well has been absolutely amazing, and also my brilliant assistant Claire Barker. I mean, that's my sort of team, and they. But we have worked with MPs like Jess Sato. We've worked with cross-party. There's been no politics in this, which has actually been really quite refreshing. There's been, no one-upmanship at all.
Yeah.
And I think that has been important on this issue because, we want this issue, frankly, to carry on, to last. If there's change of governments, change in ministers and all the rest of it, it's not been a sort of campaign that's been run in that way. But in terms of the legislative wins, so depictions of strangulation in pornography will be elevated into the extreme illegal pornography category. Long overdue. Likewise with incest. I think a lot of this stuff, people will be surprised, wasn't already illegal.
Yeah.
Most certainly.
And incest, I mean, I'm sorry to if some of your listeners and watchers are like, well, incest, who on earth is watching that? I mean, that is one of the most popular categories in porn now. And step incest as well. We've made all forms of step incest that would be illegal in the real world, illegal in pornography. And that includes, I think it's very important to say that that's a sort of scenario where it's a stepfather with a stepdaughter in the house, that sort of, that very, very abusive and troubling content that is essentially encouraging, child sexual abuse in the home. And that just that cannot be right.
Yeah.
So I'm delighted that's passed. The other two other very big, or three actually very big wins were depictions of child sexual abuse material. So the mimicking of a child has a very popular genre where, to the untrained eye, it could look like a sort of a child as young as sort of 9 or 10, but because the actress is over 18, that was technically legal. It was a sort of a way to circumnavigate child sexual abuse law, and I'm delighted to say that also any child, under the age of 16, so under the age of consent, to depict that scenario again will be illegal, which is a big, has been talked about a lot, but there was a sort of just a difficulty in getting it over the line. So we're so pleased about that, because we know that perpetrators of child sexual abuse with a real child, as it were, say that often having watched pornography was a gateway crime.
Yeah.
Watching that sort of content got them interested.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, last year I think was the highest year on record for child sexual abuse material online, and that's just a terribly troubling direction of travel. And then finally we have the government has agreed to putting in place a timeline for a review into how do they put a statutory duty onto porn platforms to prove that they have got consent and the age verification of performers, and if those performers want to withdraw consent, that can happen as well. And that is a low bar for an industry.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
That really blew my mind.
Yeah, I mean, they're commodities, humans, right? And there's no other industry where you wouldn't have to open your books and show actually the figure, the audits, the finances are okay.
Yeah.
And so there, it's like, whatever goes, and obviously some companies say, well, we do this, but we just have to take their word for it.
Yeah.
That's no good. This industry cannot be light touch regulation, actually, although I'm a very much generally in lots of areas, business regulation I don't like, but in this area, it's the one place where it shouldn't be light touch. It should be much more.
It's very high harm.
Exactly, not passive, much more proactive. And so that I'm delighted with. And then, of course, nudification app ban. Still have to keep a very close eye on that, because the app stores, I think, are there is still a lot of capacity to find nudification apps. But but the law has been changed to say that the creation and the possession that is now going to be not allowed. So that's an important step.
Yeah, very
massive
much
step.
And I think it sets a societal signal as well, that it's a social reset for what is decent and proper behaviour in this regard, and not allowing tech and firms who are making a huge amount of money for drawing people down an avenue of harm, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd always accept that a law change and regulation, that's one bit of the jigsaw.
We always say that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very keen to talk a bit about enforcement through today as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if you want to ask anything more about.
Well, we might have covered it with what was said there, but this question interested me. We live so much of our lives online, right? Especially the even generation below us, they're digital natives similar to us, but so much of their interaction is online now. That if online and offline parity was achieved in this country, what would disappear from the internet sort of overnight? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that above and beyond what we've spoken about.
Well, I think that clearly, I'm not naive in thinking that there will always be bad content that you can find, but legally, a lot of content would disappear. So you would have that category of pornography that we've just talked about. That would have to disappear. And I think what needs to be done, though, in the sort of infrastructure of regulation and how do you actually make that happen, rather than just sort of it should happen but it doesn't, because there's lots of pornography that is obviously illegal but still is there, is a much more proactive enforcement mechanism. So you know, in fairness to the big porn providers, they would say, well, look, we will adhere to the law because we are a legal porn company, but you can't allow smaller, high-risk firms or platforms just doing whatever they want and not pulling them down quicker. And I think there does need to be a much bigger, well, it has to be global as well, push in the way that we do with terror content. You know, I think that sort of segue into sort of harms to women and children in particular is not done enough with that kind of content. I don't think there's been nearly enough serious thought into actually how do we get that content down quicker. So of course, like I said, if you are determined to see really, you know, bad content, illegal content, you can find it. But it's that point that it really should be quite hard to find. It shouldn't be something that's just sort of offered up to you.
Yeah.
No, at the moment I can still Google, let's say, perhaps if you put in rape porn, it wouldn't give it to you quite like that. But if you put in raping pornography or some sort of scenario, so I don't want to sort of signpost that to people, but you can find that quite easily. And those are sites that are not behind an age gate. Rape porn is illegal. No ifs, no buts. Anything marketing that is an illegal site. And you shouldn't be able to find that. So there's going to have to be a much bigger conversation, I think, with search engines. I think there's a much bigger duty also on law enforcement getting much better tech around sort of getting this stuff down much quicker. And I also think that the payment providers, so those payment providers that prop up the pornography industry, you know, your MasterCard, your Visas, SegPays, there's a whole host of infrastructure and ancillary services that allow money to be made. They have to be much more involved as well. And I'm hoping that regulation and a much more serious approach to regulation from the UK, but also I feel as though a big global shift is coming. That will, I hope, make a difference because it's all about the money. You know, that is, you know, laws, regulations, one thing, but actually if you start sort of going after the how they make their money, that starts to equate into real change.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that, aren't we, elsewhere across the online harm landscape with
I think so.
Big, you know, big social media platforms and the way that, you know, kind of hits their bottom line is impacting and changing behaviour, perceived viewer and user numbers is critical. So if you start seeing those flow away. We were going to actually ask the question, who do you think is missing from this conversation at the moment? And I wonder whether payment card providers or those kind of controlling that money flow are in that audience, or is there anyone else, or is there anything more that you'd say to that group about how they could get involved?
They're not missing because they have been involved in this industry for a long time, and there was a very kind of famous and talked about, and people might be aware of it, moment where an amazing sort of woman called Layla Micklethwaite discovered that a huge amount of child sexual abuse material was on Pornhub. And overnight, MasterCard stopped the payments. And then, you know, 24 hours later, all of that problematic content that was pointed out to them came down. So it really is possible to sort of clean up websites. And I think that there just needs to be a much bigger, more proactive conversation, I think, with those organisations who I hope will be receptive. Because I think it ultimately, when we're seeing now, as you say, there is so much more public awareness about the harms of online content. And I think people are really going to sort of stand up and say, I'm not having this, particularly when it's starting to, people see it affecting their children. So I think the companies have to be really quite careful that they are not getting this wrong. And that there will be, you know, people sort of vote with their feet, don't they? And no company is sort of insulated from that.
No, not at all. You know, it doesn't matter how big you are if you start losing your customer base, ultimately.
But I certainly think there are there are sort of anonymous entities that are very powerful in this industry, and I think that they also have a big responsibility. So there's everyone has a part to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we find it quite an interesting blend, actually. We're seeing this across a lot of the work we do at the Meritocracy, that ideally the moral argument would win the case, but actually it is a blend of that sort of opening the door, and it is actually that bottom line financial hit that really moves the dial quicker than anything.
Yes.
So it's just really interesting how those two worlds are meeting at the moment in the online arena and offline, in fact.
Yeah, and I think I've always thought that there could be, we in the public sector could sort of, we need to understand each other more, actually, both sides of the coin. And you can still make profits, but you can also make the world a better place. I mean, I don't want to sound too sort of schmaltzy, but I think we could get better at that, definitely.
Absolutely. I think profit and purpose, they don't have to be opposite sides of the coin. They can absolutely come together. And I think, as you've just pointed out, the parents, the consumers of tomorrow are going to demand that. And once the lid has been lifted on, the harm that proliferates in this arena of online pornography and what it means for people and how it shapes sexual behaviour, I think people will start to demand, actually, I want, any product or any company that I engage with or use to be on the right side of this debate.
I think that there's plenty of analysis, actually, of regular porn users. They want to know that the people they're watching are not sort of being coerced into it or abused. And I think that there's probably could make very good business sense, some of this stuff as well, like you say. But that, I don't think that's been explored enough, really.
Yeah.
No. And again, I'm sure if you look for it, right, there's probably labelling now of ethical pornography providers. And I think you're exactly right. If you are interacting with that content, I'm sure it would shock most people listening to this that performer could be underage and you don't even know, as someone watching it. I mean, that would, certainly terrify most of my friends, I'm sure.
I mean, one of the proposals I had in the review, which I hope will be considered very seriously in the whole kind of regulation sprint about, because obviously we've won on some criminal points. So, as we've discussed, certain bits of porn are going to be upgraded into the illegal bucket. That's great. But the criminal law is obviously a very blunt instrument. So you can't sort of, regulation does need to kick in to bring a bit more nuance into things that you can't necessarily criminalise as such. And I think that there should be, I hesitate to say kind of red tractor, given the context of Tory MP watching tractor porn. But there could be a sort of, this is actually an ethical porn company that has done X, Y, and Z and doesn't show content, I would say teen content, for example. I think the sort of this sex with underage girls, I think there's certain genres that really should be aren't acceptable. But would be very hard to sort of criminalise totally. But it's still, there's just a kind of an acceptability of what that really stands for.
The ethics. And I think, that's a really interesting point about then leading on to enforcement, because we know that, when people are raising these kind of topics online, we see it in kind of the segue from Instagram for OnlyFans creators, for example, trying to draw people into their paid content, that they'll sit just on the right side of that legal boundary. Or even when people are trying to have kind of very positive conversations about pornography, actually they might end up kind of those then get closed down because of, the search terms not being kind of, flagging as a risk, or people use emojis as a way to kind of code what they're saying. And it's so hard to keep on top of the kind of ever expanding vernacular and vocabulary of that.
Exactly. And I think that's why, whether it's Ofcom or whether it's, let's say, the BBFC having a more active role in the online world, I think you've got to have a sort of wing of that proactive regulator that is not just sort of setting standards and then not doing anything about it. I think you have got to proactively sort of be part of that world and sort of understand, well, actually that content is totally not appropriate and we need to act on that. I think there needs to be somewhere where you can report this kind of content, because at the moment, and it's not just for sort of pornography content, we have a situation where I'm deeply worried about chatbots and how they are grooming children, and that we are not going far enough, I don't think, on the regulation of that those sorts of machines. And there is so for example, if you're a parent and you think that your child is sort of getting bizarrely close or being very badly influenced by that sort of material coming out of some of these companies. You can go to the company, but you've got nowhere else to go to. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that, I know it's going to be inconvenient and take up a lot of work, but, the scale of the problem shouldn't stop you from taking the right decisions for the sort of best course of action, I'm afraid, as a government and as a regulator. I mean, that's what you've got to do.
Absolutely. And chatbots have kind of existed in that sort of grey area with the Online Safety Act and regulation for quite some time. So that's definitely a really important arena to throw the spotlight onto, because we're seeing those kind of that sort of attachment economy coming into to sort of coming in off the back of that attention economy.
Well, I mean, someone in the run-up to publishing the review who knew a lot about this issue and had gone in to do quite a lot of work himself, said about the terror he had actually for his sons. And again, going back to the point where boys are so involved in this and who I worry about as much as the girls, is that some boys are falling in love for the first time with a sort of chatbot, essentially. That's their first romantic kind of connection, because it's so cleverly done. It's often done through gaming, and then with a view to sort of leading you on to, to other sites to monetize, or obviously in a more kind of sexual side, the sextortion that's going on with boys as well. It's it really is something that I just don't think we can, again, look away from.
No, absolutely. And I wonder whether that is a moment to talk about education and viewers and the role of education and the kind of experience of users and of viewers. And kind of, is there a role for schools in this arena? What can education do for parents? And kind of what do good programs look like?
Yes. So I think certainly, I mean, that was a big recommendation. And I'm pleased actually the government's taken that on to some degree with their violence against women and girls strategy, that certainly pornography has to be, or harmful pornography, I should say, has to be part of a good sex education programme. But, they do, I think schools do need quite a lot of support in this, because obviously it is a difficult topic. If you're like the sort of geography teacher who's just doing it off the side of his or her desk, and you have to sort of talk about these difficult issues. So, I think it's all well and good announcing these things, but I think quite a lot of thought about, well, actually, what does that programme look like? I think there should be quite a lot of standardisation, I would have thought, across schools, because you don't want to have a situation where one school's excellent at it and another school isn't. I think that the issues that it can bring up can be really challenging for teachers, and I don't think that should be just sort of shoved under the desk, really, because in some ways, this education around online harms, on, all the things that are going on now in kids' lives, that's probably as important as learning geography. I mean, it's a really big issue, and I think the government has definitely not given enough guidance for quite a few years on it, because there's been this, problem around how far do you go, what age do you start, and the reality is another shocking statistic from the Children's Commissioner. A 13-year-old boy, before he's had his first kiss, is likely to have seen rape, incest, strangulation porn. So unfortunately, it's something that has to be addressed appropriately, probably as soon as you get into secondary school, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's almost about us engaging with the reality of what's going on for young people and really meeting them where they're at, and understanding that, because I know, that excellent report by the Children's Commissioner, and a lot of the children interviewed as part of that said they wish they hadn't seen that content. They didn't actively go looking for it. It was, presented to them, or perhaps shown by somebody else who didn't really kind of understand what they were doing. And it's almost about us in our response across all of this, recognizing what the reality is as opposed to what we wish was the case. And I think a lot of the work in this arena, people think, oh, that's all a bit, maybe we'll just keep that at arm's length, as we started off talking about today. But the reality is there with our young people, with people across society. They are being exposed to this content typically very young. So it's about meeting them where they're at and helping them to process that emotion for themselves too.
I know. It breaks my heart to think of, such young children encountering that kind of content, and so that's why I am pleased. I'm very, age verification is no small thing, and I think it does definitely stop those younger children from just by accident, finding it on Google, let's say. But having said that, though, there's sometimes the home pages of some of these sites are still, too much, if you ask me. I mean, for example, we've got sort of extraordinary scenario in my view. Might have to have a little rest before I take this on, but you've got pimping websites that are not behind age verification, and they are really problematic, if you ask me. And so there's still kind of areas that you can that need to be sort of protected around, because before you know it, they'll always sort of find sort of a place to go with certain things, and it's it's something that children absolutely need to be protected from, because it changes their whole kind of worldview.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a bit of a curveball question with this, and it's you might have an insight from this from the kind of central government perspective. That it seems to me uniquely difficult in terms of how ingrained your personal sex lives are with the real world, and that kind of boundary. Obviously, when you start to look at the more extreme stuff, like people can get on board with terrorist material online, yes, get rid of it. But because this is such an integral part of our lives, and love and marriage and relationships, and is there like the prudishness, the embarrassment that we started off talking with this about? Is that a particularly British problem? Are we seeing better sex education, for example, in cultures where that's spoken about more as a family? And do you know what I mean? Like the Britishness of this problem.
Yes, it's an interesting one, because actually, as Brits, we consume probably more porn than per head, I think, than
probably the same part of the coin, right? Just
Yes,
the prudishness
same issue.
leading to that,
But are we good at talking about it? I mean, probably not. And I'm sure you make a very good point, and you've got to strike the right balance, haven't you? And that's why I approach this work, because I think if you start judging people, and if you start being, preachy, and especially as a politician, that is a massive turn off. Sorry, excuse the pun. But which is why I think we've just always got to bring it back to, this is really proportionate, and this is basically recreating the law that has been in place for many, many years governing offline porn. And there can't suddenly be like the guardrails taken off and anything goes, particularly when you're dealing with, we all know, these companies that are just going to push everything as far as they can.
Yeah.
In fairness to the UK, though, I don't think we're too bad at sort of getting to the right place quite quickly, because we are now trailblazers actually in online safety. We are certainly now the crime bill with these amendments that's passed. We're now definitely ahead of the curve in terms of many countries on this, Western democracies. And in fact, we had Laura Castell, who is the lead rapporteur for the Council of Europe, came to visit us by complete chance on the day that the bill passed.
Oh, that's good timing.
I know. It was like sort of all the stars had aligned, and we just presented her with this sort of fantastic bit of
it's every week we're doing this, don't worry.
We're always doing this. And so I think everyone was absolutely delighted, but we had a very good conversation about how this has got to be a global push, and how some countries are only just having the conversation, and other countries are a bit further down the track like us. But we are definitely, in terms of really thinking about what were the problem areas, I think we are now leading the pack, which is why we have a big responsibility to show that it's working. A bit like Australia with social media. There is that comes a pressure.
Yeah,
setting a new precedent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads us very neatly to enforcement, right? In terms of back to enforcement, that actually it's going to require such an extra territorial push, as in like all countries coming together. We know that none of this kind of operates within neatly packaged borders or boundaries. And obviously there's lots of responsibility there for platforms, for, as you mentioned, regulators, for other tech companies.
I think for public awareness as well.
Public awareness.
I think I think that if you're in the UK and you possess certain types of content, you could be arrested. And I think that I'm not for a second thinking you can police your way out of this, but it like I said, there's about 20 levers that need to be pulled.
Yeah.
And that I think the public awareness around what now is acceptable and what isn't, what is criminal, what isn't, that there needs to be a bit of a better push around that. I'm not quite sure 100%. How you do that, but you have to sort of, I think that I would argue the government, once we get to the end of, the resting place of where the regulation lands, they really, I think that is important. It's going to be important. And I think that the enforcement, I think that, I feel as though policing is going to take this more seriously. I think very senior police officers are very engaged in this, particularly those who are addressing, violence against women and girls. I think there's no doubt that this is, having an effect on violence against women and girls. I would hope another recommendation was that much better sort of data collection around, if you're charging someone for rape, you should also charge them if they've got illegal pornography on their machines and screens. We know that Sarah Everard's murderer was found with a whole heap of free-to-view pornography, very violent pornography across all of his devices when he was arrested. So I think it would be, in my opinion, helpful for the police to, firstly charge more for illegal pornography when it's found on devices, particularly when the perpetrator is also, is primarily being arrested for a sex crime. But I think having more data around that correlation would can only be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that starts to build the public awareness picture. And also for ultimately the providers of that pornography to kind of there to be a traceable line to where that's led to real world violence and real world harms. That just continues to build that evidence base to fuel further regulation, further enforcement.
And I think it has to be taken a lot more seriously. Policing has always been, and we've said this a lot in the violence against women and girls world, when you look at the sort of terror budget and the sort of VORG budget, you look at how many people are on a day-to-day basis affected by terror and VORG, you compare it, there's no comparison. Far more people are affected by that kind of violence. And yet there's just sort of for many, many, many years, just that the attention and the care and the sort of urgency has not been there. I think that is changing, but we can't sort of be complacent, and we have to be very clear on that.
Yeah, well, we can't change it fast enough, really, can we, in terms of the impact and social harm. And it really is, striking to me, I think, that comparison, because I think if we did approach violence against women and girls and violence against women and girls content with the same kind of zeal and commitment that this is wrong and harmful, we would see change happen even faster. And it's, I think, been, as we've spoken about, seen as something that happens behind closed doors and in a private life, or maybe it's just a little bit of a laugh, and actually without real understanding for a lot of people, if they're having a conversation kind of down the pub, real understanding about what that really means and what that kind of pornography content, for example, can lead to when it then is, consumed within the home then acted out. And I think people have seen that's a bit of a joke because it's porn, versus actually this has real world consequences.
Yes, absolutely. Very well put.
So I wonder, we're sort of coming up to a close today, and this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, as I knew it would be. I've been so excited for this episode. Is that if you could, you've obviously probably need a little bit of a breather after the last few weeks of, major change being secured. But if there's kind of one thing that you could change tomorrow and just kind of get that ticked off, what would it be?
God, that's a good question. In the context of the work I've been doing, I think it would be illegal content that is just sort of operating, websites that are obviously showing illegal content, for them to just to be, the ability for them to be closed down within 24 hours. That's what I'd like to see, because I think that would then help the legal industry just drive them to much quicker change. And I think that just that ending that grey area, and really having a proactive system that was like, bang, you press a button and those kind of sites are taken out of sort of search engines. They just disappear. And I feel optimistic that I think technology's being created at such a pace. I cannot see why we can't get to a point where you feed the model, you say, this is what we're trying to get rid of, bang, and that goes into the system. And we, like I said, there'll be the dark web, there'll be ability to find stuff, but ultimately you can clean it by at least sort of 70, 80%.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't spoken a lot about AI today, but that's obviously quite a big kind of elephant in the room, so to speak, in that, AI has certainly changed the violence against women and girls landscape. It's certainly changed the way harm is proliferated. It's certainly changed pornography. And there's a lot to answer for in terms of that technology and the harm it perpetrates against, victims, ultimately, whoever they are. But I think what's also then really important to remember is that AI has a really powerful role to play in being part of the solution
100%.
for a better world. And when it's come to, these enforcement problems that we found so hard to crack, we've always had challenges with burnout, capacity, huge trauma for people who have to, proactively go and kind of look for, report and take down this content, or, that won't be solved overnight with AI. But I think the more that the kind of human impact can be taken out and certainly not kind of offshored and just put elsewhere into other countries,
I totally
really using technology for ultimately creating that cleanup and making things safer.
Yeah, I feel optimistic that we're in this sort of decade where we haven't quite got there with the technology, but but the harm is sort of still there. I think that I'm hopeful that we will be in a much better place. You've got to hold on to that. But I think we will be.
It feels almost like humanity's kind of biting back. Big tech. You're not running this show anymore. And you're having global case studies on this stuff now. Obviously, with Australia banning social media, those big things are going to keep toppling the dominoes. And there's massive cases against Meta that have come out recently. That I feel like we've just had enough, really.
Yeah, and I think also combined with things that are not related to sort of necessarily online harms and pornography, what we're talking about today, is that AI is obviously, does have a significant threat to humanity in terms of sort of our jobs and all the rest of it. So I think that AI does have to behave itself.
Yeah, absolutely,
and prove why it's a force for good, because we are not total passengers.
No, we should be able to direct it, you'd imagine.
Yes. Yeah, and I think cleaning up some of the harm that's been proliferated by ultimately made it much easier and more accessible by technology is a very good place to start.
Yes, and I think timing's everything as well, because I think the sort of the fears around stopping technology and stopping innovation and privacy and all the rest of it, they obviously all still stand, but I think that actually the technology does exist to stop a whole load of, let's say, live streaming of child sexual abuse material. I just think that, in the sort of the updates, the systems updates, that kind of technology should just be placed on our devices. You could stop so much overnight. Those arguments need to be had again, and they need to be won.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're very much here to support that. And a lot of the listeners as well for Found It often ask us kind of what can they do? They really care about creating a safer and fairer world. They want to see this change. So perhaps that's a good example, actually, of demanding more of tech companies. So. But what can our listeners do ultimately?
I think exactly that. I think really sort of get behind the fact that that safety in tech and safety by design is something that they would buy and they want. I think that's sort of very important for for people who have children, but also just in our lives generally. I think sending that signal and voting with our feet on that front in terms of products is really going to be vital.
I love that
absolutely.
Point.
Yeah, I love that point as well. Definitely, we have the power to make the change with the pound you spend and where you place your attention.
Eyeballs and clicks.
Yes.
Use them wisely.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd add to that, Lou?
No, I don't think so. But I've got one final wrap-up question, which we ask everyone every time we do this. So I'm going to ask both of you. So Baroness Bertin, we'll start with you. So obviously a really challenging and difficult arena to work in general, and it's been absolute chaos for you, I imagine, for the last few weeks of just getting this over the line. So what have you been doing outside of work or to keep you sane for our listeners and watchers?
So I really like playing tennis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Have you played it all your life, or is it a recent?
No, I suppose I have, sort of. I mean, I'm not that good. That makes me sound like semi-professional.
No, I'm just wondering.
No, but I do like tennis. And the other thing I really enjoy, don't laugh, is fishing.
Do you?
Yeah.
Nice. Where do you
Lovely.
fish? Like off like boats or
So
coast? I
I-
don't know much about fishing. As a Cornishman, I really should know more. I was going to say
should.
fly fishing or
Yeah, hang on.
No. So
You've
so
got
I,
fishing heritage, Lewis.
So I love fly fishing.
Okay, love fishing. Amazing. Fishing and tennis.
But
Lovely.
I haven't done much fishing, to be fair.
So
I
fly
do manage,
fishing.
I do
Is that like
yeah.
getting your waders and?
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? Fly
It is
fishing. The
hard.
technique is
It's
really difficult.
hard. But it's so satisfying when you get a fish.
Is it mainly trout?
Yeah.
Well, yes, trout and salmon.
Trout and salmon. Nice.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to try that
I'm
one
not
day.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's sort of going to go down well with your listeners.
I think it will go down really well.
It really will.
That's a bit of humanness.
Yeah.
We're talking about AI. This is the real stuff.
Yeah.
Fly
Yeah.
fishing. You can't AI that. Not yet, anyway.
I thought I sound like such a baroness.
No,
Oh,
no,
God.
don't worry. You've got to lean into it
No,
sometimes.
that's good. We need a little bit of Baroness energy.
Yeah.
We do need a little bit of that. And Laura, what have you been doing?
Well, I was going to say that,
Fly fishing?
no, I've never tried that, but it does sound...
Come, you should go.
Oh, you should do that together. That's
I
the
would
next
love that.
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We can
That-
go fly
isn't
fishing
there a
together.
Oh
program?
my God. Yeah, isn't it? Bob
Called
Mortimer, like Gone Fishing
Gone
with...
Fishing.
Yeah, gone fishing. Yeah, exactly.
Right, you can do
Oh, okay,
an alternate
A
version.
spin-off.
We're
A
doing that.
spin-off of
We're doing
Found
that,
Out.
okay, Rustic?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Our
what have you been up
producers are
to?
shaking their heads like, oh my God, how are we getting
Don't
this
get me in
camera
waders, for
equipment
the love of
into
God.
a river? It does sound quite meditative though, and yeah,
can imagine
I'd
really
be up
relaxing.
for trying that.
Well, it's just there's a hope in every cast.
Yeah, nice.
I think because I'm a very impatient woman, but I just there's something.
You'll just keep going with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I think there's a nice metaphor in there for kind of making law change.
Exactly. You've got to
every
keep
time.
You just got to keep... Oh, I've got a bite.
You
I've
get a
got
bite. Oi.
Go on, let's change the law.
There's definitely a metaphor in that.
That's
You can
so
see why
good.
you're good at both parts of your job. What have I been up to? Yeah, I sound equally like, is this going to resonate with listeners? I've been gardening a lot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm very into green fingered. You know, it's the time of year for planting things. Get outside, touch the grass.
Oh,
always
lovely.
good.
Yeah. What have you been planting?
I've actually just recently been bought a citrus tree, so I've been planting up a sort of Mediterranean patio.
Nice.
And a
Pretty
climbing rose
cool. And a climbing rose.
for
Yeah,
our fence.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we need to give some more respect to our listeners. Why wouldn't they care about tennis, fly fishing, and gardening? This is an eclectic.
Exactly. I
This is an
mean-
eclectic bunch.
100%. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, Gabby, thank you so much for your time. This has been an unbelievable conversation. I knew it would be. Thank you for all the work you've done in this space. It is,
Well,
you know,
thanks for having me. It's
precedent
been,
shifting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
yeah,
Well,
it's,
it's great to be on a podcast like this. So thank you.
yeah, you're so welcome.
No, thank you so much. I can only second that. I've been excited about this episode for a really long time. And for our listeners, I think this being recorded in this week is just couldn't be more perfect in terms of the timing and the campaign and the work that your team has done, as small and perfectly formed as they are, and all those around you. We really do salute you, because this is going to make a massive difference to the lives of everybody across the country ultimately, and you know, perhaps a precedent for the whole world. So it's a really big moment. And now, just a quick thank you to Exo Bikes and Exo Barbers. We are in their space for our studio as ever. And it is certainly our spiritual home of this podcast. So we're very glad to welcome you here. And to Dan and Ollie for our intro tune. They told me I didn't have to say thank you to them anymore, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Maybe one last time.
Maybe one last time. And then also, of course, to our studio producers, Rustic Studios, Lois and Tom, who are just incredible as ever. Next time, we are going to be having a very important discussion that relates very much to what we've been talking about today. Louis Theroux and Stephen Graham have both waded in and had their piece to say, and we're going to come
They're
in
not our
too.
next guest. It made it sound like they were coming in.
Oh gosh, yeah, can you imagine?
Imagine.
Sorry,
We are
all.
on the up.
We don't have Louis Theroux coming in.
Or Stephen Graham.
Or Stephen
Yes.
Graham.
But
Yes.
if you're up for it.
You know what,
if you're up for
Stephen?
it-
If you are free next month, we can get that arranged.
Fit you in.
We'll squeeze you in. But we are going to be talking about masculinity, men and boys, their experience, and ultimately how that relates to social justice. So keep tuned for next time. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie.
So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is right now. Sit back and listen to the Meritocracies podcast. So you found